Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be going over the best weapons for solo players. Now this list is in no particular order and I'll be ranking every weapon on 5 different categories. Their ability to fame farm and spec up, how good they are at solo instanced PvP like Corrupted Dungeons, how good they are at open world PvP, how expensive they are, and then lastly how well they can transition into group play if they need to. Now real quick before this video starts, I'm giving away a bunch of premium and skins and stuff courtesy of SBI, so if you want to win, there will be some codes hidden throughout this video like the one that's hiding in the tree over here, which are first come, first serve, so make sure you watch very closely. They'll appear for like maybe 1 to 5 frames in the video very quickly, so if you see them, enter them right away. And then I'll also be giving away some codes on my Discord, which link you can find in the description, as that's a little bit more friendly for mobile users. Anyways, good luck on the giveaways, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Starting us off, we have the all-time classic for the channel in the one-handed spear. This is just a staple of all-time great solo player weapon. The one-handed spear really is a jack of all trades, master of none, except honestly not really master of none because it is master of some. Looking at its rankings, starting with its fame farm ability, how good it is at speccing up, it is very good. It is a super solid weapon, especially for doing things like solo dungeons. You can clear them extremely fast. It used to be the fastest, now it's a little bit outshined by some other things, but still incredibly fast. Hasn't really gotten any slower, just other things have gotten faster. And even for open world mobs, again, a very solid option for those. Really with a good mix of AoE damage in the Qs and Ws, and a solid consistent single target damage with the auto attack and Q stacks, it's always going to be good in a PvE situation. For instance 1v1 content like Corrupted Dungeons, it's a little bit more meta specific, not really top tier, but it's still very solid. It has been a top tier option in the past, although not right now, so there's a good potential that it will get there again. However, if you are a really good one-handed spear player, you can definitely make it work. It's never not been viable for Corrupted Dungeons, so you can always make it work if you're good with it. For open world PvP though, it is definitely top tier, one of the best weapons, if not the absolute best. It is just super overall strong for the open world. If you want to gank with it, it's super strong with the tons of mobility that it has, as well as a good amount of CC with it as well, and it has a ton of different W options that are all viable in the open world. Tons of them are viable, from Harpoon to Cripple to Impaler. All of them have their uses where they can be helpful, making it really well suited to any situation that you might come across. It can even fight outnumbered very well. It really has everything you would ever want for a solo open world weapon. Looking at the cost of the one-handed spear, it is quite a cheap weapon, meaning it ranks pretty highly in the cost as it's a very good one to use. Dying will not set you back too much. It's not an artifact weapon, so it'll always be relatively cheap, so you really don't have to worry too much about the cost. As well, what's really nice, it is a one-handed weapon, but it works really well with the cheap offhands like torches and mist collars and things, so you don't really need to splurge on the offhand to compensate for it. Just overall, you can make tons of really cheap builds with the one-handed spear, meaning it's very good in the cost department. Where the one-handed spear really struggles is this transition to group play. Really, it's only a solo weapon. You're not going to find that much use in group play for it. It's not super viable. You can have some limited viability in like really small 2 to 3 man groups in the open world, but other than that, you're really not going to find too much uses for it as a group weapon. It's always going to be outshined by other things. For our example build here, really one-handed spear has a ton of different viable builds that you can run with it. It's a super versatile weapon, as I talked about before. This is the classic spearling build, which is super good in basically any situation. You can fame farm one with it, you can go open world well with it, it can even do Corrupted Dungeons well. Just a super versatile build. So for this build, we have the one-handed spear as our weapon, obviously with the torch as our offhand, hunter hood for our helmet, mercenary jacket, and then soldier boots. For cape, food, and potions, you don't really need a cape for this build, but if you are going higher tier and want to run one, undead cape is a really good option. And then for food and potions, we're going to run pork roasts for our food, and then usually you're going to want healing potions as your potions. For abilities and passives on our spear, it's Q1 Lunging Stab, W1 Forest of Spears, and then the second passive, the Life Leech one. And for your armor, it's all of the special abilities down the board, along with Balanced Mind on your chest piece and Quick Thinker on your helmet and shoes. Or the other way around, doesn't really matter with these two, you just want your helmet and shoes to be on one and your chest piece to be on the other one. Next up, we have the Great Nature Staff, which is another timeless classic solo weapon that has been run for years. However, this one has a fresh breath of life with the new nature reworks. It was getting a little bit nerfed and stale before, but the new rework has brought it back up to the amazing place that it used to be. For its fame farming ability and how quick it is to spec up, this is literally top tier, probably the single best weapon in the game for fame farming right now, as it's super good. The Q damage is ridiculous on nature, so you can fame farm super fast pretty much no matter what you want to do on solo mobs and on groups of mobs, meaning no matter what you're trying to kill, it will always be a super good weapon. However, it shines heavily in the soloing group dungeons and soloing static dungeons, and doing that sort of fame farm, it is absolutely incredible for, and you can get some insane amounts of fame per hour and spec up super fast if you go this high tier soloing group stuff. For instance, 1v1s in corrupted dungeons, it's an alright weapon, definitely not the best, but also definitely not bad. Really, it's super matchup and meta dependent. It can be super strong and you can completely destroy opponents, or it can feel super weak and completely get destroyed. Really depends what sorts of builds are being run at the time and what matchup you just happen to find yourself in. Really, in a 1v1 instance environment like corrupted dungeons, Great Nature is always going to be a weapon that is pretty rock, paper, scissorsy. Some builds you're just going to beat and others are just going to beat you. So depending on the meta, it can either be really good or really bad. Right now, it's sort of in the middle. A lot of matchups you beat pretty handedly or go relatively even against, but there's a few still that you kind of get destroyed by. So it's not amazing, but it's definitely not bad. For open world PvP, it's definitely better than it is in instant PvP. It is quite strong. It's not quite as versatile as the one-handed spear, so it doesn't rank quite as highly. However, it is extremely strong and you can have a lot of success with it. Really, its strength comes in open world fights. You can 1vx extremely well. It's probably the best weapon on this list for 1vxing, just going out the open world and 1v2ing, 1v3ing. Really, you can be super comfortable in doing these 1vx's in the open world. The reason this doesn't reach quite as high as a one-handed spear in a sort of S tier category is it's a little bit harder to gank with the weapon, as it does better when things are fighting you, not as well when things are running away from you and trying to escape. It can still do it quite well. It's got the slows and the knockup and a fair amount of damage, but it really shines when you're being attacked instead. Looking at our cost, it's a fairly cheap weapon, so similar to the one-handed spear, very good on cost. It's a two-handed weapon, non-artifact, so it's always going to be relatively cheap. However, there doesn't seem to be as many people crafting this at super high tiers, so it can get a little bit expensive if you start going really high up into like the tier 8s and tier 9 equivalent sort of Great Natures. It can get a bit expensive there, but otherwise, overall, it's a pretty cheap weapon. Looking at its ability to transition into group play, it's alright, a little bit better than the one-handed spear, but still not all that great. Again, similar, it can do the super small scale open world stuff quite well. In fact, the Great Nature is probably one of the better choices for these sort of like 2 to 4 man groups in the open world. It can be extremely effective, but once you get out of that, and even for that, there are probably some better options. One quick note with this though is that it is the nature tree, and so if you want to spec up an entire tree and not just the one Great Nature Staff, the other nature staffs are always in pretty high demand in group play, so if you're going to do the entire tree, it can transition to group super well with the other nature staffs. Looking at an example build here, this is a general build that you can sort of do anything, any solo activity with the Great Nature with. So we have the Great Nature for our weapon, the Mage Cowl for our helmet, the Cleric Robe for our chest piece, and then the Soldier Boots for our boots, along with Thetford Cape, Beef Stews, and then Poison Potions. For abilities, you want to run Thorns on your Q. For W, you want to switch in between the first two W's, Bramble Seed and Revitalize. Bramble Seed if you're doing like PVM or something and need more damage, or else Revitalize is just a general super good sustain option. And then lastly, Energetic on your passive. For your armor, the helmet you can swap in between Poison, again for more damage, and Bop if you're doing PvP and need a little bit of self-peel to sort of space melees off of you and bop them back. You can go with the Bop ability, along with the special abilities on your chest piece and shoes. For passives, it's Aggression on your helmet and chest, along with Toughness on your shoes. Last but not least, we have the Bear Paws. This has been a super generic popular weapon for quite a long time and has become increasingly popular for solo players for quite a while now. So starting off with its ability to fame farm and spec up, it's not great, but it's also not bad. The worst of the three on this list, but the other two are really good for this, so it's just a sort of average fame farming weapon. You're not really going to struggle too much, but it's not going to be one of those record-breaking fast fame farms like the one-handed spear and especially the Great Nature. For 1v1 instance content like Corrupted Dungeons, it's again sort of not great, but not bad. It has been top meta before. It has great mobility for going against things like hiding builds, but its E can be pretty easily countered, and it has received some nerfs, and the playstyle around it has received some nerfs, so it can struggle versus very good players, leaving it in a sort of okay option. It's definitely not top tier right now. It's definitely not unplayable. Again, sort of similar to the one-handed spear. In the right hands, it can do very well. However, against really skilled opponents, you might struggle a little bit, as it can be subject to counterplay. For open world PvP, it is extremely good. It has insane amounts of mobility and insane amounts of damage, which is pretty much everything you want in the open world. Anything you want to do, this thing is going to be incredible for in solo open world PvP. There's a reason it is the top option for most players right now. For solo ganking, for example, it is probably the best or one of the greats, as it is probably one of the few weapons left that can solo dismount other players, assuming they're on Oxes and things like that. The mobility it gives you and the consistent damage it gives you means you can actually stand a good chance at dismounting players from their mounts. And it is pretty decent at fighting as well. With the overwhelming mobility it has, you can space opponents as you need to, and it can basically win against any other build that you see in the open world. Not to mention, alongside all of this, its overall damage is probably the highest out of all three weapons, so if you have really high IP, you can even blow through healers and take fights against groups that have healers just due to the overwhelming damage that it does possess. Looking at the cost, this is really where you might want to shy away from the Bear Paws. Probably the main reason to not want to run Bear Paws is because they are very expensive. They are a relic artifact, they're an extremely popular weapon, and they're two-handed, meaning, yeah, they get really expensive really fast. So if you want to just go in like low tier 4.1, you're still going to be having a fairly hefty price tag on that set. And if you want to go higher tier, again, you're going to have to make sure you don't die too much, because those Bear Paws, high tier Bear Paws, get super expensive. Lastly, not to end on a low note, its transition into group play is very solid, as Bear Paws are pretty much a good weapon for any open world PvP. They're amazing for solo, but they're also really good in group play in the open world. They're probably not the single best option for axes for any sort of group play in the open world. However, they're never bad, and they're always at least pretty decent, so they don't get the top tier ranking when it comes to transition to group play, but it is really solid, very, very good at transitioning into group play. For an example build, I'm just going to give you the standard solo open world Bear Paws build that pretty much everybody uses. It's a really good build. You have the Bear Paws for your weapon, the Fiend Cowl for your helmet, Assassin Jacket, and Royal Sandals, along with Fatford Cape, Poison Potions, and Beef Stews. For abilities on the Bear Paws, Q is Q3, Rending Rage. W, you're going to want to use Adrenaline Boost, and then on the passive, it is Deep Cuts. And for your armor, it's special abilities across the board, along with aggression passive on your cloth, so your helmet and shoes, and balanced mind on your assassin jacket. Okay, so those are the top 3 weapons to main as a solo player. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, make sure to do all the stuff that you did in YouTube videos, and I will see you in the next one.